On the surface, their life looked like thousands of others. Mornings began before sunrise, with coffee brewed too strong and shoes placed quietly by the door. He worked long hours, proud of the weight he carried, convinced that providing was the same as loving. She watched him leave each day with a soft smile, one hand resting on her growing belly, whispering encouragement he rarely heard. There were no screaming fights, no broken plates, just silence stretched thin. He was not cruel in obvious ways. He paid the bills on time, fixed what broke, and spoke of the future with practical certainty. But his affection had become efficient, measured in routines rather than warmth. Conversations stayed shallow, drifting toward numbers, schedules, and plans. When she tried to share her fears, he nodded without really listening, already halfway back to work in his mind. He believed stability mattered more than tenderness. She learned to wait. She learned to fold loneliness into patience, to excuse his distance as stress, responsibility, sacrifice. Pregnancy made her sensitive but also hopeful. She imagined that the baby would soften him, draw him closer, remind him of what truly mattered. At night, she lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, wondering if he noticed how quiet she had become. She told herself love was quieter now, matured, settled. Small moments revealed the imbalance, missed doctor appointments blamed on meetings, texts left unanswered for hours, a hand withdrawn when she reached for it in public. None of it felt dramatic enough to confront. Each instance alone seemed harmless. Together, they formed a pattern she couldn't name without feeling guilty. After all, he wasn't unfaithful. He wasn't violent. He was simply absent. Friends admired him. Family praised his dedication. They told her she was lucky, that many women would trade places without hesitation. She smiled and agreed, swallowing the strange ache that followed those words. Gratitude became another mask she wore daily. She didn't want more, she just wanted presence. Unnoticed by both of them, a quiet shift was happening. Resentment was taking root beneath understanding, and confidence was quietly turning into entitlement. He believed his effort earned him distance. She believed endurance was proof of love. Between those beliefs, something fragile was breaking. Neither of them knew it yet, but the calm they lived inside was not peace. It was the stillness before a choice that would change everything. Soon, a single decision, made in exhaustion and pride, would expose every quiet crack, forcing them to confront how neglect, once ignored, can grow heavy enough to destroy even the gentlest promises before either of them realized it was too late. The hardship did not arrive all at once. It crept in through unpaid invoices, delayed paychecks, and promises that tomorrow would be better. When money grew tight, she was the first to adjust. She sold personal keepsakes quietly, stretched meals without complaint, and reassured him when frustration sharpened his voice. She believed marriage meant absorbing the weight together, even if it bent her spine. He noticed her efforts, but not with gratitude. To him, struggle felt like failure, and failure demanded someone to blame. Slowly, his words shifted. What began as stress turned into criticism. He reminded her that she did not earn, did not contribute in ways that could be measured. He spoke as though love was an expense, and patience a debt she owed him for carrying the burden alone. Each comment landed softly, then lingered. She never argued back. She told herself he was hurting, that pride wounded easily when provision was threatened. She doubled down on support, working longer hours when she could, hiding pregnancy exhaustion behind smiles. At night, she rubbed her belly and whispered apologies to the life growing inside her, promising stability she could not guarantee. The baby became her private reason to endure. What he did not see was how much she sacrificed to protect his ego. She shielded him from family questions, downplayed their struggles, and absorbed embarrassment meant for both of them. In public, she praised his ambition. In private, she swallowed tears. The imbalance grew wider with each passing month, but he interpreted her silence as agreement. To him, her loyalty confirmed his authority. As his resentment grew, so did his sense of entitlement. He expected understanding without offering it, obedience without appreciation. When she asked for reassurance, he dismissed it as emotional weakness. Pregnancy, once a shared milestone, became an inconvenience he rarely acknowledged. Doctor visits were skipped. Baby plans postponed. Hope was present only in her quiet rituals, not in their conversations. Friends began to notice the change in him. He spoke bitterly about responsibility, joked about being trapped. She laughed along, masking the sting. She believed that standing beside him, no matter the cost, was proof of devotion. She believed love meant staying when respect faded. Each belief pulled her deeper into isolation. Inside her, fear and faith wrestled daily. She imagined a future where hardship softened him, where fatherhood rewired his priorities. She clung to that vision because the alternative felt unbearable. Leaving was never discussed. She did not consider it an option. She believed sacrifice would eventually be seen. What neither of them acknowledged was how contempt poisons slowly. Every belittling remark carved distance. Every unspoken hurt piled weight onto a foundation already cracked. The marriage still stood, but it was being hollowed from within. And as financial pressure mounted and patience thinned, he began to entertain a thought he would never voice aloud yet. A thought that promised relief for him and devastation for everyone else, waiting just beyond the fragile hope she still carried. That unspoken idea felt harmless at first, almost logical, but it lingered, growing louder with every setback, quietly reshaping his justifications, while she remained unaware that the love she defended was already being weighed against convenience and future regret ahead. She entered his life without resistance, like an answer arriving before a question was fully formed. Confident, polished, and endlessly attentive, she spoke the language of admiration fluently. Where his wife listened quietly, this woman praised loudly. Where home felt heavy, she felt light. She laughed at his complaints, validated his frustrations, and framed his sacrifices as evidence of greatness being wasted on the wrong life. She dressed ambition like glamour. Expensive tastes, effortless charm, and stories of connections she casually mentioned painted a future that shimmered just out of reach. With her, he was not the man behind on bills or burdened by responsibility. He was potential. He was misunderstood. He was deserving of more. Each compliment worked like a drug, numbing the guilt he pretended not to feel. What began as conversation slid easily into confession. He spoke about feeling unappreciated, about pressure, about a marriage that no longer inspired him. She listened with calculated empathy, never criticizing his wife directly, only asking questions that led him there himself. She made betrayal feel like honesty. She made escape sound like self-respect. He told himself it wasn't physical. Not yet. That distinction became his shield. He justified late messages as harmless, private lunches as networking, secrecy as protection. The emotional distance from home widened as emotional intimacy elsewhere deepened. At night, beside his sleeping wife, he scrolled through promises that glittered brighter than reality. She offered him a version of life curated for envy. Travel, status, ease. She spoke about investments, opportunities, introductions that could change everything. In her world, struggle was temporary and success inevitable. All he had to do was choose himself. The implication hung heavy. Choosing her meant choosing more. Meanwhile, at home, his wife sensed the shift without understanding its source. His patience shortened. His eyes wandered. Conversations ended faster. She blamed hormones, stress, fear. She tightened her grip on loyalty, unaware that loyalty was no longer being reciprocated. The mistress never demanded. She suggested. She planted visions and let his imagination do the rest. She framed his marriage as an obstacle, not a commitment. Slowly, he began to see his life through her lens, measuring worth by excitement instead of endurance. By the time he realized how far he'd drifted, the emotional betrayal was complete. Lines once unthinkable were already crossed in spirit. The only thing left untouched was legality. Even that boundary began to soften as exhaustion met temptation. He rehearsed reasons late at night, convincing himself that one bold move could reset everything. He imagined consequences shrinking once action replaced doubt. Opportunity stopped sounding dangerous and started feeling deserved. Somewhere between fantasy and fear, restraint weakened. What remained was a narrowing window where choice still existed, trembling under pressure. He would step through it, believing control was still his, unaware that momentum had already chosen for him, carrying him toward a moment that could not be undone, and would soon demand a price fatal. The papers arrived without warning, delivered with the same efficiency he once reserved for paying bills. There was no conversation, no careful build-up, no gentleness. He stood across from her with distant eyes and a steady voice, as if reciting something memorized. The word divorce fell into the room and stayed there, heavy and immovable, while her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, as though protecting the life inside her from what she was hearing. He spoke quickly, almost impatiently, explaining that the marriage had run its course. He said love had faded. He said he felt trapped. Then came the words that shattered whatever strength she had left. He told her she no longer added value to his life. Years of loyalty, endurance, and sacrifice were reduced to a calculation that no longer worked in her favor. When she tried to respond, he interrupted, reminding her that emotions would not change reality. His cruelty was not explosive. It was surgical. He criticized her dependence, her softness, her quiet nature. He framed her pregnancy as unfortunate timing, another burden he had not asked for. He spoke about honesty as if it were virtue, about courage as if walking away absolved him of responsibility. Each sentence landed cleanly, deliberately, leaving no room for misinterpretation. She did not beg. Shock rooted her to the floor. Tears came silently, sliding down her face without sobs or drama. She searched his expression for hesitation, for regret, for some sign that fear had taken control and might release it. There was nothing. He looked lighter, almost relieved, as if shedding weight he had grown tired of carrying. Though unseen, the other woman filled the space between them. Her presence shaped his certainty, hardened his resolve. She was the future he had chosen, glamorous and promising, standing in stark contrast to the wife before him. Where one represented patience and endurance, the other represented excitement and escape. He explained the logistics with chilling calm. The house would remain his. The savings were his. Stability was no longer shared. He spoke of fairness while ensuring every outcome favored him. He suggested she should be grateful for honesty now, before resentment turned uglier. The audacity stunned her into silence. News traveled fast. Friends whispered. Family chose sides. Sympathy felt distant and useless. She packed her belongings slowly, folding clothes with trembling hands, careful not to disturb the fragile life growing inside her. Each item felt like a goodbye. The walls that once held dreams now felt cold and unfamiliar. The humiliation lived in the details. The way he avoided her eyes while signing. The way his voice softened only when discussing schedules. The way he spoke of co-parenting as if emotions were inconvenient. She realized he had prepared for this long before she sensed anything wrong. That realization hurt more than his words. It rewrote every memory. When she finally walked away, there was no dramatic scene, no final speech, just quiet dignity wrapped around unbearable pain. She carried only what she could manage. Pride was the one thing he could not take. He watched her leave without following. The door closed softly behind her, sealing a chapter he believed was finished. Freedom felt close enough to touch. What he didn't realize was that the silence she left behind was different. It waited. Because while he celebrated release, she stepped into uncertainty with nothing but resilience and an unborn child. And in that moment, something irreversible began shifting. The story he thought he ended was only gathering strength. After the divorce, her world became small and quiet. She moved into a modest apartment where sunlight barely reached the corners, carrying only essentials and memories she refused to unpack. Days blended together, marked by doctor visits and long walks meant to calm a restless child inside her. She avoided mirrors, not out of vanity, but because recognition felt fragile. She did not speak his name, not to friends, not to family. Silence became protection. It allowed her to breathe without explaining how quickly love had turned conditional. At night, when sleep resisted her, she wrote letters she never sent, then tore them apart carefully as if destruction itself required gentleness. Money was scarce, but fear was managed. She found work that asked little and paid less, grateful for anonymity. People saw a pregnant woman rebuilding after loss. No one asked questions. No one knew what she carried beneath the surface, locked away behind a calm expression. She preferred it that way. Then the phone calls started, always brief, always from numbers she didn't recognize. When she answered, there was silence on the other end, followed by a soft click. She told herself it was coincidence, wrong numbers, paranoia fueled by exhaustion. Still, unease settled in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. One afternoon, while organizing paperwork for the baby, she paused over an old folder she hadn't opened in years. Inside were documents carefully preserved, edges worn from time. Names appeared that did not match the life she now lived. Dates that preceded her marriage. Institutions she never mentioned. Her hands shook as she closed the folder, sliding it back into its hiding place beneath winter clothes. She began checking over her shoulder without knowing why. Certain places stirred memories she couldn't fully access, like echoes without sound. She avoided crowded areas. She trusted routines. Control mattered again. Occasionally, she stared at her reflection and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. There was strength there, but also restraint, as if she were constantly holding something back. The baby kicked often, grounding her in the present. She whispered reassurances, promising safety, promising truth when the time was right. People assumed she was healing. In some ways she was. Pain dulled. Tears became rare. But healing was not forgetting. It was containment. Every day she chose stillness over exposure, knowing that some histories invite danger when revealed too early. The calls continued, less frequent but more deliberate. One night a message appeared without words, only a familiar symbol she hadn't seen in years. Her breath caught. Recognition hit hard and fast, pulling at a part of her she kept buried. She deleted the message immediately, heart racing. The past had found her. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to remind her it was waiting. As she lay awake, listening to the city hum beyond thin walls, she placed a hand over her stomach and made a silent decision. The name she never spoke aloud would remain hidden for now. But if the world insisted on digging, she would not be unprepared again. Because the life she once escaped was not gone. It was watching. And soon, it would collide with the one her husband thought he had destroyed, revealing truths neither of them were ready to face when everything finally surfaced. Freedom felt intoxicating at first. With his wife gone, the weight he claimed to carry lifted instantly. The mistress stepped seamlessly into the space she had been preparing for all along. Their life together looked impressive from the outside. Better restaurants, better clothes, carefully curated photos that suggested momentum, success, arrival. He mistook attention for admiration and noise for happiness. She praised him constantly, especially in public. She spoke of his courage, his ambition, his refusal to settle. He absorbed every word, believing he had finally chosen correctly. When people questioned the speed of his new relationship, he dismissed them as jealous or small-minded. He enjoyed explaining how some people were meant for comfort, others for greatness. Money appeared to flow more easily at first. New opportunities surfaced through her connections. Deals were discussed over expensive dinners, sealed with laughter instead of contracts. He trusted her instincts completely, ignoring the absence of structure. Risk felt thrilling. Caution felt like weakness, something he associated with his former life. But cracks formed quickly beneath the polish. Bills grew unpredictable. Promised investments stalled. Explanations became vague. When he asked questions, her tone shifted. She reminded him that success required faith. That doubt killed momentum. Slowly. Accountability turned into accusation. If things went wrong, it was because he hesitated. Their home, once glamorous, became tense. Arguments replaced affection. She criticized his earning potential, his timing, his lack of vision. The same words he once used on his wife now returned sharper, aimed directly at him. He told himself it was pressure, temporary, necessary. He refused to see the pattern. He began working longer hours, chasing deals that never closed. Sleep shortened. Anxiety crept in. The validation that once fueled him now came with conditions. Love was no longer freely given, but earned through results. Failure carried consequences. He learned quickly how disposable admiration could be. Meanwhile, his arrogance grew. He spoke proudly of reinvention, mocking the stability he abandoned. He dismissed fatherhood concerns as manageable, something to handle later. Empathy had no place in his vocabulary anymore. He believed pain was proof of progress, that discomfort separated winners from losers. The mistress revealed her control subtly. She monitored his contacts, discouraged independence, positioned herself as gatekeeper to opportunity. When he pushed back, she reminded him of everything she had given him. Gratitude became leverage. He felt trapped but refused to admit it, especially to himself. The lifestyle demanded constant performance. Appearances mattered more than truth. Debt hid behind smiles. Silence replaced intimacy. He began waking with dread, though he told everyone he had never been happier. Pride demanded the lie continue. Late at night, alone, he sometimes thought of his ex-wife's quiet steadiness, then immediately buried the memory. Nostalgia threatened the narrative he depended on. He convinced himself she was irrelevant now, part of a past he had outgrown. What he didn't know was how fragile his position truly was. Documents were missing. Accounts didn't add up. Promises unraveled under scrutiny. The foundation he stood on was hollow, built on illusion and impatience. As pressure mounted, she grew colder, already scanning for her next upgrade. He mistook her distance for stress, unaware that loyalty was never part of the arrangement. The rise he celebrated was already collapsing. He just hadn't felt the ground give way yet. And when it did, there would be no one left to soften the fall, no quiet patience to catch him, only consequences waiting to collect everything he thought he owned. The warning signs were everywhere, ignored by choice. Each compromise tightened the trap. Each excuse cost him leverage. The man who once believed he escaped loss was now surrounded by it, though he still smiled publicly. Fate was not rushing. It was patient, aligning events carefully, preparing a reckoning that would arrive disguised as opportunity very soon. For years, she had carried her quiet dignity like armor, hiding her past behind routine and restraint. No one suspected the truth, not her friends, not her colleagues, not even the husband who had betrayed her. Yet beneath her modest life, an inheritance unlike any other waited silently, a legacy spanning centuries, continents, and unimaginable wealth. She had renounced it once for love, believing stability and devotion mattered more than power or fortune. That choice, once noble, now hung in stark contrast to the betrayal she had endured. The first clue emerged subtly. Documents she had long ignored, a ledger tucked into a forgotten folder, seals and signatures she barely recognized, spoke of holdings that dwarfed any ordinary fortune. Corporations, natural resources, historical estates, and stakes in industries the world assumed were independent, all traced back to her family. She was the sole heir, the living key to a $3 trillion empire hidden in plain sight. As she traced the lineage, the enormity of it struck her. Generations had built this empire with precision and secrecy, safeguarding it from greed, corruption, and exposure. Every alliance, every acquisition, every legal maneuver had been designed to ensure continuity, and now, by sheer happenstance, it was hers. She realized that she had walked away from unimaginable privilege for someone who never deserved it. Every insult, every dismissal, every humiliation suddenly acquired a sharper, almost cinematic irony. Her heart did not leap in celebration. There was no jubilation in sudden wealth. The feeling was colder, sharper, vindication wrapped in the silence of justice finally overdue. Her past endurance, the patience, the unnoticed sacrifices, all had been a prelude to this moment. She had not been powerless. She had been choosing the wrong battlefield. The implications were staggering. She could influence global markets, redirect industries, fund initiatives that could reshape societies, all while remaining completely invisible. The power of what she possessed was unlike anything her husband could comprehend. His arrogance, his shallow sense of triumph, now existed alongside his ignorance of the scale of what he had lost. The contrast between them could not have been more absolute. She allowed herself a rare smile, not for vengeance, but for recognition. For years, she had been underestimated, dismissed, and mocked. Now, the quiet, patient figure he had scorned was the fulcrum on which entire sectors could pivot. She could rebuild, redefine, and reclaim on a scale that dwarfed his own ambitions. Every decision he had celebrated in her absence would now meet an invisible counterbalance, a reckoning measured not in words but in scope and influence. Still, she moved cautiously. Power of this magnitude demanded strategy, patience, and timing. She could not simply reveal herself and the empire in a single breath. The world was unprepared for her emergence. The moment required precision, like chess played over decades, each move calculated to ensure control and prevent chaos. She was not seeking revenge for spectacle. She was reclaiming justice on her own terms. As the revelation settled in, a singular thought crystallized. Everything he believed he had gained was temporary, fragile, and superficial. Everything she had once surrendered for love was not lost. It had been biding its time, waiting for her to awaken to the scale of what was truly hers. The quiet woman he dismissed was now the architect of possibilities no one had imagined. And when she chose to step forward, the world, and he would finally understand the cost of arrogance, betrayal, and the illusion of victory. In that quiet, unassuming apartment, the weight of a $3 trillion legacy pressed down, not as temptation, but as inevitability. A force she had never sought, yet one she had always carried, ready to shift the balance of a life that had once seemed defined by loss. The stage was set, and the reckoning was coming. He arrived quietly, unsure if he had the right, unsure if anything could still exist between them. The world he had built with the Mistress was crumbling, investments failing, alliances faltering, respect evaporating. He had traded stability and loyalty for glamour and validation, and now the illusions he chased offered nothing but exposure. He came to her not with arrogance, but with hesitation, carrying the weight of every misstep he had ignored. She saw him before he spoke. Time had changed them both. She was taller now in presence, unshakable in calm. Her confidence did not boast, it simply existed, effortless and undeniable. He realized immediately how stark the contrast was. Once he had dismissed her, underestimated her, now she towered above him in both poise and influence. Everything he had once considered insignificant radiated value in ways he could no longer grasp. He spoke first, voice low, measured, betraying an unfamiliar vulnerability. He did not demand forgiveness, he did not excuse his actions. He admitted his mistakes. He confessed how wrong he had been to believe her devotion was replaceable, to think that love could be measured in convenience and not courage. Each word felt like a confession to someone he had long underestimated. She listened silently, her expression steady. She did not soften. She did not relent. There was no drama, no begging, no spectacle, only presence. Her eyes, steady and observant, catalogued every nuance of his regret, every shadow of shame he carried. He had imagined confrontation as an opportunity to win her back. Instead, he faced the unyielding force of dignity he had discarded. The irony was exquisite. He had once humiliated her with words and decisions that left her with nothing but patience and restraint. Now he stood across from her, powerless, aware that everything he had coveted, success, wealth, attention, was now controlled by the woman he had abandoned. His triumphs had turned to ashes, and the quiet empire she commanded made the scale of his losses impossible to ignore. He attempted reasoning, offering apologies, explanations, and the hollow promise of change. Each sentence emphasized his lack of foresight. Each plea reminded her of the nights she had endured alone, carrying pain and the child he never acknowledged as responsibility. She absorbed it all without interruption, a calm observer rather than a participant. The balance of power had shifted so completely that even his words seemed to echo in a hollow chamber of consequence. Her response was precise, deliberate, and merciful in its restraint. She acknowledged his presence without granting him influence. She reminded him of the choices he made, the life he abandoned, and the strength she had cultivated in the absence of his support. Her dignity was a mirror reflecting his failures back to him, more devastating than anger could ever be. He left without demand, without protest, carrying only regret and the bitter realization that the woman he had discarded was now untouchable. She remained, serene, commanding, untouched by past injustices. The empire she inherited, the child she protected, the resilience she embodied, they all stood as monuments to patience, foresight, and integrity. As he disappeared into the distance, the city around her seemed to echo the lesson he had finally learned. Choices carry consequences, and the value of what is quietly extraordinary is often invisible until it is lost. In that stillness, she allowed herself a small, private smile, knowing that the reckoning had been delivered not through vengeance, but through the irrefutable power of her enduring strength. He had begged, and she had responded, not with rage, but with the quiet, devastating authority of someone who had never needed him to define her. In that moment, the story that began with loss, betrayal, and humiliation reached its apex of poetic justice, leaving viewers suspended between awe and satisfaction, knowing the world had finally realigned to honor dignity over regret. She held her child close, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath her hand, a rhythm more reassuring than any promise from the past. In his eyes, she saw innocence untouched by betrayal, a future untainted by the greed and short-sightedness that had defined his father. Every decision she made now was measured against the legacy she wanted to leave, not the pain she had endured. Their days were filled with quiet lessons, kindness, patience, integrity, and curiosity. She taught him the value of honesty, the power of empathy, and the strength in restraint. Laughter replaced tension. Stories replaced silence. She nurtured a world where love was a choice, not a commodity, a safe space where character mattered more than wealth or status. Outside, the world moved as it always did. News of her husband's failures filtered through whispers and headlines. He floundered in the life he had constructed, isolated by arrogance, abandoned by opportunity. Each misstep was a stark counterpoint to the stability she had built. The contrast was undeniable, one life defined by consequence, the other by deliberate care. She never spoke ill of the man who had left them. In her eyes, vengeance had no place in shaping a child. Boundaries were drawn, lessons were learned, and resilience grew naturally. Her fulfillment came quietly in small victories, in evenings spent reading together, in walks where the world seemed vast but safe. The child would grow knowing love, trust, and the quiet certainty that his mother's sacrifices had built a life worth inheriting. He would inherit wisdom, security, and a model of strength without cruelty. And in that home, untouched by the chaos of betrayal, the future thrived, not as a response to loss, but as a testament to what patience, dignity, and love can achieve when one chooses to rise above the past, carrying only what matters forward. Stories often leave us searching for answers, but some truths whisper quietly, refusing to be shouted. Humility, loyalty, and patience carry value far beyond what appearances suggest. Wealth, glamour, and charm can dazzle, but they rarely measure the depth of character or the weight of sacrifice. Judging worth by what is visible is a risk few recognize until it is too late. This tale reminds us how easily people discard what is priceless: love, integrity, resilience, without realizing the treasure they hold. The quiet, patient, and unnoticed often bear the deepest strength. Choices made in haste, guided by desire rather than discernment, can lead to regret that echoes far longer than any fleeting pleasure. As viewers, we witness the contrast. A life built on superficial gain collapses under its own fragility, while one grounded in values, care, and foresight flourishes steadily, quietly, and profoundly. The moral does not arrive with spectacle. It settles in the mind, lingering, prompting reflection long after the final scene. And perhaps the most enduring lesson is simple. Worth is rarely obvious, patience is rarely rewarded immediately, and true power lies not in taking, but in nurturing what cannot be replaced. The story ends, but its echo remains, urging anyone who watches to pause before discarding what they do not yet understand, and to recognize that the quietest hearts often hold the greatest strength.